Masechet Pesahim Daf Yud Zayin. Not the easiest stuff today. The topic is overall liquid impurity in the Bet HaMikdash. So liquids have their own characteristics, and in the Bet HaMikdash there are exceptions to even those complicated characteristics. So that's what we'll be talking about. It's a complex because we're going to see three different overlapping controversies about this. I'm going to try to fit them all together. So if you like puzzles, you'll like this. But I tried to make it clear by making a 2-page outline today for the first time. Never had a 2-page outline before. All right, so hopefully we'll go step by step, and we'll try to figure it all out. Okay. Yesterday we were introduced to a conversation that's in Haggai and Terei. Haggai, one of the last prophets, comes to the Kohanim as they're rebuilding the second Bet HaMikdash, and he asks them a couple of questions. So let's remind ourselves what they are. The first question is, if someone is holding Besar Kodesh Bichnaf Bigdo, the simple explanation is that someone is holding something, sacrificial meat in his garment, and that touches any kinds of foods or drinks. The question is, does holiness get transferred? Is it transmutable? And they say no, right? Holiness is not. And then he says, what about if it's something tameh and that touches something else? Then does that transmit to tum'ah? They say yes, that's correct. And then he says, Haggai tells them back, so too are you people. All the things that you do are tameh. In other words, even though you're making holy sacrifices, or you're right, but you're still tameh. They actually were already making sacrifices before the Bet HaMikdash itself was built. They had a mizbeach. So this is great, you're making sacrifices, but there's tum'ah all around. And so, tum'ah is transmittable. Kedusha is not, and therefore you better clean everything up and make everything tahor and rebuild the Bet HaMikdash in the right way. Okay, that's the simple, straightforward meaning. But the rabbis see here a halachic conversation, and in their take, Haggai is testing out the halachic knowledge of the Kohanim to see, do they really know their ins and outs of the laws of Tumah and Tahara. And so in their reading, Besar Kodesh is not sacrificial meat, but rather euphemism for something that is impure. It's talking about a sheretz, a dead rodent. So this sheretz that a person, the kohen, is holding or in his garment, and so that's touching the garment, and then that garment touches bread, and that bread in turn touches stew, and the stew touches wine, and the wine touches oil. So this is not touching any of them, which is the peshat, but rather it's touching them in turn, this and then this and then that. Then does it become tameh? And they say no, it doesn't become tameh. It's too many steps. But then he says, well, what if, like, take away the garment? Yeah, let's say you have tameh nefesh, not a rodent, but rather a person who was defiled by a corpse, and he touches any of these, probably meaning touches the bread, that touches the stew, that touches the wine, that touches the shemen. Then does the oil become tameh? And they said yes. Okay, so we have two cases. I'm going to call this Haggai number 1 and Haggai's question number 2. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to see two interpretations of this. So let's get right into it and see what they are. Gufa. Rav Amar ishtabash kahaneh, Shmuel Amar la ishtabash kahaneh. We saw the beginning of this already yesterday, that Rav said that the Kohanim failed the test. They made a mistake regarding number 1 when he was asking them. They gave the wrong answer. They said it's not tameh, but in fact the first case is tameh. As Shmuel said, they got the right answer. They said it's tahor, and in fact it is tahor. Okay, what their difference is, they are interpreting the case slightly differently. How so? Rav Amar ishtabash kahaneh, revi'i kodesh ba'aminayhu. According to Rav's interpretation, he counts 4 steps. And so the question was, if you have Ava Tumah, and then it goes 4 steps, the 4th one, does that become tameh? This is sacrificial meat. And they said tahor, but in fact, we know regarding sacrificial meat, it goes to a 4th level. So they should have said tameh. So Rav said they made a mistake. Shmuel interprets the case differently. he says, Shmuel Amar, La ishtabash kahaneh, hamishi bakodesh ba'aminayhu, v'amru le tahor. He counts 5 steps. And so it goes from Av down 5. The shemen is the 5th level, and there's nothing past the 4th level. So they said tahor, and they were correct in saying tahor. Okay, let's see exactly how they count this in the pasuk. Bishlama lerav, haynu dichtiv arba, lechem v'nazid v'yayin v'shemen. Ela lishmuel, hamisha minaleh. Let's go back to the verse and look at it. So according to Rav, they were asking as follows. If I have this sheretz, and that touched bread, so the sheretz is abatuma, that touched bread, that's rishon. That touched nazid, stew, that's sheni. Yayin is shilishi, and that yayin touches oil, so the oil would be revi'i. So therefore, it should have been tameh, and yet they said no, it's not tameh. So you see, they got it wrong. Okay, so that's how Rav interprets it. How about Shmuel? Shmuel's going to add bichnaf bigdo. This sheretz is touching the garment, so the garment is the rishon, and then the lechem is sheni, nazid is shilishi, yain is already revi'i. That's the end. And then he asked, how about the shemen? Does it go to a 5th one? And so they said, no, it doesn't go to the 5th one. According to Shmuel, they got the right answer. Okay. Both of them are ignoring the kol ma'achal at the end. That's just a side point. Okay, so that's Miketiv. Ela Shmuel chamisha menaleh. We just saw where Shmuel get 5. Miketiv benaga kenafo. Benaga bichnafo ketiv. Bamesh benaga bichnafo. Right? It touched something on the corner of the garment, but not the impurity itself. All right, good. So now that we saw that, I'll show you the outline. So that was Rav who said the Kohanim failed the test. They got the second one right, but the first one wrong. So they got a 50 on the test. Shmuel says they passed. They got 100. Okay, Rav explains it as revi'i. Shmuel explains it as 5 levels of hamishi. We're going to see now first a challenge to Rav. From the corpse impurity from the second case, Haggai number 2, we're going to answer that, and then we're going to see a challenge to Shmuel from the Haggai's response at the end, but they'll both answer it. So let's first see the question to Rav. Tashema vayomer Haggai im yigat tameh nefesh bechol ele hayitma vayanu hakohanim vayomeru yitma. So the second case is not talking about a sheretz, but rather something that touched the corpse, tameh met. And so Bishlam al Shmuel midahacha la ishtabash hatam nami la ishtabash. You see, in the second one, they knew the right answer, and presumably there was another step above. There was no garment there, and so we said on that case, yes, surely it becomes tameh. And so you see, they knew the law. They knew the second case, they got that right, and they knew the first case, they got them all right. First case was 4 levels. The second case was 5 levels. First case was 5 levels. The second case was anything less than 5 levels, and so that's why they said tameh. Good. Ela lerav, ma'ishana hachad ishtabash, u'ma'ishana hatam de la ishtabash. What's the difference? According to Rav, either the sheretz touched the first item, and then that goes down 4, so it should have been tameh, or a tameh met touched the lechem, and then it goes down to the oil, and that's the 4th level, so it's tameh. So how come they got the first one wrong and the second one right? They're basically the same question, just whether the source of tumah is sheretz or a person that touched a dead body. It should be the same. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abu, Bikin hen betumat met, ve'en bikin hen betumat sheretz. You're right, it's basically the same question. We know that. But these Kohanim, they knew their laws regarding corpse impurity. Again, this is a very strict thing. It happens, people die all the time. They have to deal with it. And so they knew that corpse impurity goes 4 levels, but not 5. That they were sure of. But sheretz doesn't happen that often. They weren't so knowledgeable about that. And so that's that one. That was the first question. They got that one wrong. And that explains it. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2, Rabbeinu Amar hatam revi'i hacha shelishi. That case was a revi'i. The second case is a shilishi. When they asked about tameh met, they weren't talking about a person who touched a corpse, but rather the corpse itself is what touched the bread, which touched the stew, which touched the wine, which touched the oil. So since it's the corpse itself, a corpse itself is above is avi avot tuma. So then that when it touches the meat will make that Here, I'll show you tameh met. So that's the corpse itself. When that touched, applying to the same list on number one, but now with tameh met, that touched the bread. Now the bread is av, nazid is rishon, yain is sheni, and shemen is only shelishi. And so you see, they got that right. That one is tameh. All right, good. So we solved the question on Rav. Now a question on Shmuel. Tashema, vayan Haggai vayomer, ken ha'am hazeh v'chen hagoy hazeh lefanai ne'um Hashem. After they answered the two questions correctly, right? Answered two questions, then Haggai says, "So too are you guys tameh." Now, bishlam alirav, hainu dichtiv tameh. It makes sense according to Rav. Rav says they failed the test. They only got a 50. That's why he said, "Oh, well, you guys don't know the law." That's so. Therefore, what you're doing in the works of your hands are tameh. You better learn the laws better. Ela lishmuel amay tameh. But according to Shmuel, they aced the test. They got both questions right. So therefore, why is he telling them that what they did is tameh? Rather, maybe he was speaking rhetorically. Oh, so can it be that what you did is tameh? Oh, you must know what you're talking about. But that's not quite right, because the pasuk actually says says that their actions were in fact tameh. Ketiv. Amar mor zutravi temerabashe. So the answer is mitoch shekilkelu et maasehem. The truth is that they did know the laws of Tumah and Tahara very well. And that they did fine. Their problem was with their other deeds. They were doing other bad things. According to the Septuagint on this pasuk, they were taking bribes. Or maybe they're doing some other immorality. Whatever it is, they were doing something else. And therefore, he said, even if you're keeping all the details of the ritual Tumah and Tahara correctly, 100%, but your other actions are not good, then we're going to consider all of the service that you do in the Bet HaMikdash as if it was tameh, right? You can't just keep this particular ritual and forget about all the other important Torah laws. Okay, that's actually quite an interesting reading of the Haggai. He's testing them out. He says, "Oh, you know all the laws? Okay, very good. You got this one. You got this one. Then why are you so corrupt?" Right? Okay. So now we solved we resolved the question for both the challenge to both Rav and Shmuel. Okay, now we're going to bring in second machloket. Now this time between Rav and Levi. And two interpretations of what Yose ben Yoezer said. Remember Yose ben Yoezer, we saw his deoraita earlier. He was one of the earliest of the Zugot, one of the earliest sages during the times of the Maccabees. And he said that temple liquids are tahor, special law in the Bet HaMikdash, that the liquids there cannot become tameh. Okay. And now, how much did he mean that? Did he mean that totally? All liquids, they can become tameh at all, somewhat. And so we're going to see one machloket about this. We actually already saw half of it in the previous page. Rav says when he said temple liquids are tahor, he was only talking about blood and water. In the slaughterhouse, where there's blood and water, that area is always tahor. All those liquids are tahor. But he wasn't talking about other things that go on the altar, like oil and wine. Oil and wine, you go and you manufacture them outside of the Bet HaMikdash, and you bring them in, and then those things that are meant for the oil, even though they're meant for the mizbeach, they can become tameh. So Rav is limiting what Yose ben Yoezer said. Levi, on the other hand, has an expansive definition. He said when Yose ben Yoezer says temple liquids are tahor, right, meaning they don't give off tumah, he was talking about everything: blood, water, oil, and wine. Okay, so that is Rav and Levi. Let's see that inside. Gufa, Rav Taneh, mashke bet midbahaya, veLevi Tana, mashke be midbahaya. Okay, that's what I just said. But right, so according to Rav, it's referring, Yose ben Yoezer was referring only to the liquids in the slaughterhouse, mitabach, right? Like tabach is a slaughterer. Levi says it was talking about the house of midbachaya. The dalet in Aramaic is like a zayin in Hebrew, meaning zevach, right? The mizbeach. So that is talking about all liquids are tahor. Okay, very good. Now is going to get the part that's a little bit complicated. It's assuming that we still remember the machloket we saw yesterday. Remember, we saw 7 questions on Rav, and that was talking about this machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Also about Yose ben Yoezer. When he said that temple liquids are tahor, what did he mean by that? Rav takes it more expansively regarding this, less here, but more here. He says that liquids are tahor, meaning they are tahor in and of themselves, and they don't transmit, right? They don't transmit, and they cannot become tameh themselves. Okay, Shmuel said, no, when Yose ben Yoezer says that temple liquids are tahor, he only meant that they don't transmit tum'ah to other things, but they themselves can become tameh. So Shmuel is limiting Yose ben Yoezer's statement more than Rav in this case. So now what we have is 3 machalokot. I labeled them A, B, and C, and they all are actually related to each other. So now we're going to try to figure out is what combination of these 3 will actually work together. This is like when you go and vote. If you go Republican down the line, that's consistent. If you do all Democrats down the line, that's consistent. But if you're going to do, on for the national, you're going to do Republican, but for the local, you're going to pick a Democrat, and so then does that make sense, or is it inconsistent? So that's what we're going to try to figure out. Before we get to the Gemara, one opinion that we're already assuming, because it was all the way at the top of the daf that we did yesterday, is Rav. You see that this one's between Rav and Shmuel. This is between Rav and Levi. The third was between Rav and Shmuel. So Rav's opinion appears in both, in all 3. So Rav should be consistent throughout, and he is. We already concluded that. So let's see how that works. So Rav is consistent because he says oil and wine can become tameh. So in other words, he said when Yose ben Yoezer decreed that temple liquids are all tahor, that only applied to blood and water. Blood and water cannot become tahor at all, and that's what this says. Not even that they can't become tahor even of themselves, but only blood and water. Oil and wine are like regular liquids. They can become tahor, and they can transmit tum'ah. And so, therefore, when Haggai was talking about his case, remember Haggai was saying, if the bread touches the stew, which touches oil, wine, which touches oil. So Haggai was asking about wine and oil. And so, therefore, his question makes perfect sense. And he can explain both of those cases as he did before. If it's a revi'i, it should be okay. If it's hamishi, then if it's a Rav said, right, if it's a revi'i, then it should be tameh. Otherwise, he said both of those cases are tameh because both of them were revi'i and one was even more. So that's Rav. So Rav is consistent because he says Haggai was talking about oil and wine are not part of what Yose ben Yoezer said. They do become tameh. Everything is good according to that. However, what about the other line? Does Shmuel, right? Shmuel, I assume, is going to be consistent with Shmuel, but does he agree with Rav in B or with Levi? And alternatively, how about Levi? Can Levi agree with Rav in these cases, or does he have to agree with Shmuel in those cases, or something else? Okay, so that's what we're going to see. We're going to start off with Levi, with the assumption here that everything. Yose ben Yoezer says temple liquids are tahor. He was talking about all liquids: blood, water, oil, and wine. Okay, let's read it in the Gemara first. Le Levi, hanicha isavira le kishmuel tamar dachan miletame tumat acherim. If Levi agrees with Shmuel, who says that purity means it does not transmit impurity to other things, but it itself, the liquids themselves, can be impure, then that makes sense. Aval tumat atzman yesh lahen mishkachat la denage kulahu barishon. Then we can explain Chaggai's case if they all touched the rishon. In other words, if not that it's a chain, but rather that tememet touched any of them, touched the bread, or it touched the wine, or it touched the stew. So, in other words, as follows: if we assume that the second machloket here, that Levi says all liquids are pure, right? So now that's an expansive definition, all of these liquids. So if that follows Shmuel, who says that those liquids can become tameh themselves meaning they can become a rishon, right? Because if a sheretz or tameh touches a rishon, then that rishon liquid does become tameh itself. And that explains Haggai's case. Haggai said, can it become, if a tameh sheretz, can it become tameh? And they said yes. So it's not talking about a list. It can't be talking about a list because even according to Shmuel, it doesn't transmit to the next one, that one itself. So that works. Okay, good. But if Levi follows Rav, which is the next line we're going to read, if Levi thinks that all liquids are included, and he says that liquids do not become impure, right? Then you're really limited, okay? Because these are the two most expansive definitions of Yose ben Yoezer. And so if all liquids, including oil and wine, cannot themselves become impure, then you have no case for the Haggai's second one, where they said tameh, right? There's no case where liquids can become tameh in the Bet HaMikdash. And so, since they have no way, this would have no way of reading it, it's impossible that Levi here can agree with Rav. Levi has to only go with Shmuel. Let's read that inside. The Levi, okay. Ha'ela isava lekerav de amar dachan mamash. If Levi, who thinks all liquids are included, and dachan mamash means they are really pure, they do not become impure. Hechi mashkachat la. We can never have a case where they become tameh, and so we can't explain Haggai. Al korchech kishmel sivir. Therefore, Levi is going to agree with Shmuel. Okay, good. It doesn't say explicitly here, but it sounds like Levi would agree with Shmuel here, and would also, he could be perfectly well agreeing with Shmuel in this case also, because he doesn't have to say it's talking about a hamishi, which it can't be, but rather, Shmuel says it's talking about a hamishi, but Levi doesn't have to agree with that interpretation. He could just say that it's touching any of them. Okay, so Levi and Shmuel, this Levi and the Shmuel work together, so that's fine. But now I know Levi can agree with Shmuel, but how about the other way around? Can Shmuel agree with Levi? Sounds like it should be the same. The problem is that Shmuel here said, explain this case to be a hamishi. Why is the first case, right? The first test. Why is the first test a hamishi, right? Because it has to be a chain reaction, and that's why they said tahor, and he said it's correct. It's correct because it's a hamishi. That means if it was less than that, it would be tameh. Well, how can you have a case where it would be less than that? Let's see. Lishmuel, hanicha isavar la kerav. If Shmuel agrees with Rav, the Tane Mashke Bet Mitbachaya, that's talking only about wine and water and blood. But other ones, wine and oil, can become tameh and give off tumah. Then revi'i hu de la aved hamishi ha shilishi abed revi'i. Well, then it does. This is a problem. Because no, so then it would be fine, right? It's talking about oil and water can transmit tuma. Then it makes sense. Revi'i cannot give off the hamishi, and that was the first question, and so that's why they said tahor, which is correct. But if it was shilishi to a revi'i, then it would give tuma, and that was the second question. So if Shmuel follows Rav, it's all good. Ela isavar la kelevi. But if Shmuel would agree with Levi that Tane Mashke Be Mitbechaya, that all liquids are tahor, my iria revi'i de la aved hamishi, then why would he explain that the first case of Haggai is talking about a fifth level? Afilu sheni u'shlishi namela avde. It never transmits impurity. He wouldn't have to go that far. Al korchich de kerav svirale. Therefore, Shmuel must agree with Rav. To see that in the chart. Right. So we saw Levi has to follow Shmuel. He cannot follow Rav. However, Shmuel, since he said that the first case is talking about a hamishi, it's only tahor because it's so many levels down. If Shmuel that follows Rav, that only applies to blood and water. So Haggai is talking about oil and wine. So that everything makes sense, right? Haggai's first case is talking about oil and wine that transmit, but they transmitted all the way to a hamishi. So they said that's tahor, and they got the right answer. And the Haggai 2 was less than that. So they got the right answer. But if Shmuel would follow Levi, that all liquids are pure, meaning they cannot transmit, then there's no need to explain the first case of Haggai as a hamishi. It's going to be tahor, and no matter anything past the Rishon is going to be tahor. Okay, so to summarize what we have here, we have these three different overlapping mahalokot, and you can spend a couple of hours trying out all the different possibilities. But basically, we ended up with three permutations that work. You can follow Rav down the line, and that would be okay. You can follow Rav and then Levi and then Rav again. No, wait. Levi has to. No, sorry, Levi. Right. Shmuel has to agree with Rav. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so you can follow Rav down the line. That's number one. You can follow Shmuel and then Rav in the second case and Shmuel again. That's okay. Or if you want to follow Levi, you can follow this one of Shmuel, but not the full statement of Shmuel here, meaning not the interpretation he gave to Haggai that has to be hamishi. He could just interpret it slightly differently. And then so Levi himself, he can pick and choose. So he can agree with Shmuel in one thing and doesn't have to agree fully with Shmuel in the other. And so there you go. We were able to put together all of these different permutations. Okay, now that we've solved that, we're going to see a deoraita that supports Levi. His opinion is that all liquids are tahor. Another deoraita supporting Rav that no, only just water and wine in the slaughterhouse. Those are the ones that are pure, but not oil and wine. Sorry, water and blood. This would say blood. Okay, let's see. Tanya kevate de Rav. Tanya kevate de Levi. Tanya kevate de Levi. Well, we'll start with Levi first. What is the proof for his opinion? Hadam v'hayayin v'hashemen v'hamayim mashke be'midbahaya shenitmeu bifnim v'otzian nachutz tehorin. So he says these four liquids. Already you see that we're in Levi territory. We're in Levi territory, but the deoraita mentions all four. These are the liquids that can be offered on the mizbeach. Right? I mean, dam, any sacrifice, blood often comes with it. Sacrifices often come with a wine libation. Shemen, if you have a mincha offering, you mix it with oil. Water on Sukkot, we pour water onto the mizbeach. So these are all things that go on the mizbeach. If they became tameh, if they touch something tameh in the Bet HaMikdash, they're pure, right? They're okay. And then if you took them outside later, tehorin. In other words, it's kind of like being vaccinated. Once they're in the Bet HaMikdash and they're designated to be placed on the Mizbeach, then they are protected from Tum'ah. Even if you take them outside the Bet HaMikdash, they're still okay. But the other way around, nitmeu bachutz v'nichsan bifnim temein. But if they became tameh outside the Bet HaMikdash, right? They're manufactured outside, and even if you designate, also, I'm going to bring this to Bet HaMikdash, and they became tameh, no, the protection does not work outside. So even if you bring them in later, it doesn't help. Their tum'ah remains. Okay, the point for us is all these four liquids, once they're inside, are protected, cannot become tameh. That's what Levi said. Okay, so this is a good proof. We have another question from it, just from another source. That's the statement. He says that these four liquids are only pure in their place, meaning in the Bet HaMikdash. Well, that sounds like only in the Bet HaMikdash. That implies that if they became tameh, there, if they touch something tameh inside and then they went outside, then right that they would become tameh the second you take them out, right? Isn't that what he's saying? And that would be against what this deoraita says. Lo lema'ut nitmeu bachutz v'chnisan bifnim. No, rather what he meant. This is a really question of Yoshe ben Levi. So rather what he meant is that the other case when they became tameh outside, and then you brought them in, no good, only in their place. Okay, so v'habim koman kamad, but he said that doesn't fit with what he said. Bim koman, meaning in their place. they're in their place, they're tameh, but if they're tahor, right, which would sound like even if you take them out afterwards, it would be tameh, that they don't retain their vaccination status. Hachi kamar lo amru dachan ela shnitmeu bimkoman. We're just adding a word to what he said, and that makes it clear. What he meant to say is we only say liquids are pure when they become tameh in the Bet HaMikdash. Then, no matter what happens to them later, even if they're exposed outside, it's okay. All right, so we solved that question. Now, another Braita supports Rav. Tanya keveted Rav. Hadam vehamayim, only those two. Mashke bet mitbachaya, those are the only two things that you'll find in the slaughterhouse, blood and water. Shintmeu ben hakelim, shintmeu ben bakelim, ben bakarka, tehorin. These things, when they're in the Bet HaMikdash, whether they touched a keli, a vessel that's impure, or they fell onto the ground, and that it doesn't matter. They are tahor, even if they touch something. These are tahor. Whether they're being held in a vessel or they're on the ground, and then something touches them while they're in the vessel or while they're on the ground, they are tahor. Okay, see, he only says these two, but nothing else. Okay, so that's the proof already from there. We're going to continue though, because that Braita has a second part too. That Rabbi Shimon Omer bakelim timein, bakarka tehorin. He makes a distinction. He says if the water falls on the ground, we're going to see later on the stuff. The reason is when water falls on the ground, then it becomes kind of like a mikveh. Even though for human beings you need a large amount because you have to fit your whole body inside. Deoraita, even if you have a small amount, you can dip small things in it. And so it becomes connected to the ground when it's on the ground, and therefore cannot become tahor. But liquids that are in a vessel do become tameh. Okay, Rabbi Shimon is disagreeing with everything we saw above. If you remember back a couple of dapim ago, there was a major machloket between different students of Rabbi Akiva, and from one extreme to the other. Rabbi Eliezer says all liquids are tahor, and Viuda says all liquids are tameh. And then in between, Rabbi Shimon is one of the ones in between. So he says that liquids do generally become tameh if they're in a vessel. Liquids in a vessel do become tameh. Okay. Now that we mentioned Rabbi Shimon, we're going to do some analysis upon him, and we're going to see a couple of statements by Rav Papa. Let's see. אמר רב פאפא, אפילו למד אמר טומאת משכין דאורייתא, משקה בית מטבח היה, הלכתה גמירי לה. Even according to the opinion that liquids outside the Bet HaMikdash become tameh mideoraita, like Rabbi Shimon thinks, even according to them, the liquids in the Bet HaMikdash is we learn a halacha, right, from oral law, halacha l'Hashem Sinai, that deoraita law does not apply in the Bet HaMikdash. His chidush is as follows. Usually we say something that's asur midoraita is asur midoraita everywhere, outside and in the Bet HaMikdash, like laws of Shabbat. Only things that are d'Rabbanan do not apply. Laws that are prohibitions d'Rabbanan do not apply in the Bet HaMikdash because they're careful there. That's what we usually say. He's saying now, adding something to that. He's saying regarding impurity of liquids, even if you say it's deoraita, it becomes tameh outside the Bet HaMikdash. There is an oral tradition that says the Bet HaMikdash is an exception to that deoraita law. All right, that's what he says, but we're going to see two challenges to Rav Papa. Here's number one. Amar le Rav Huna bered Rav Natan le Rav Papa. Ve'ela had amar Rabbi Eliezer en tuma lemashkin kol ikar. תדע שהרי העיד יוסי בן יועזר איש שרדה על משקה בית מטבחיה דחן והלכתה גמירי לה מכם רינן מינה. Okay, so the first challenge is from this big braita that we've been talking about that has Yose ben Yoezer. It started off with Rabbi Eliezer saying all liquids are pure everywhere, and his proof was from the fact that Yose ben Yoezer said that all liquids are pure in the temple slaughterhouse. Well, now, if something could be pure in the tahor, when I say tahor, it means it cannot become tameh in the temple, but but it could be biblically tameh outside the temple. That's what Papa says. Then the Eliezer would have no proof from here, right? Because it could be that Yosef ben Yoezer is saying in the Bet HaMikdash the liquids cannot become tameh, but maybe there's halacha al Moshe Sinai that outside it does become tameh. So the Eliezer has no proof that liquids everywhere cannot become tameh. So you see that the assumption here, right? If there wasn't really a halacha Moshe Sinai, then the Eliezer would not have been able to make that inference, and therefore there's no such thing as that inference. Okay, this question is not answered. But nevertheless, maybe I guess it's not quite strong enough to totally disprove him. And so we bring another. Amar le Ravinad Rav Asher, ve'ha Rabbi Shimon, da'amar tumat mashkin deoraita. So, right, the one that we just quoted, he said that liquids can become outside the Bet HaMikdash or can become tameh midoraita. How do we know that? Detanya, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Omerim, la kelim tehorin, la ochalim temeim. This is talking about a case where you're not sure if it became tameh or not. If it's regarding food, it becomes tameh. So if you have a doubt regarding food tum'ah, if liquid touches food, it means, right? If you have doubtful liquid that touches food, it's tameh. Well, any doubt that's tameh, that means that's asur midoraita. So there you go. Liquids can impart impurity midoraita to food, but not to kelim, because kelim is only to the banan, and therefore, if doubtful liquid touches kelim, then it's tahor. Okay, but it doesn't matter. Still, for food it's tameh. So for food it's deoraita. So there you go. See, mashkin has a deoraita law. So that is different from what it says here. Rabbi Shimon, the Rabbi Shimon we just quoted here says, "Bakelim temein, bakarka tehorin, v'hilchetahi malik bakelim, mali bakarka kashya." So here he said that the kelim is temein. Now, at what level? The Rabbanan or the Deoraita? Well, let's see. Regarding karka, he said tehorin. Usually water that's gathered even on the floor, if it's less than a 40 se'ah, if it's not a mikveh, then it can require tum'ah, midrabanan. Midoraita, it does not, because as long as it is a revi'i there, you can dip small utensils in it. So therefore, if he's saying bakarka tehorin, he means he's removing the drabanan level of it. Now regarding kelim, he only said there was a drabanan level to begin with, right? Because that's what he says. That's what he said here, that kelim is tehorin medirabanan. So therefore, you see, if he thinks, according to Rav Papa, who says that something deoraita can become nothing, can be something that's a summa deoraita outside the Bet HaMikdash, we permit in the Bet HaMikdash, then what's the difference between kelim and what's the difference between karka? They should both be totally tahor. And so this is a strong question, kashya. Now, this word kashya does not appear in all manuscripts, interestingly, and Rabbeinu Hananel does not have it. Make this a bit bigger. Okay. And you see that here's the word kashya, and the printed edition does have it. However, the Munich manuscript, or the Sephardi manuscript, does not have it. This one's Ashkenazi also does not have it, and the Geniza fragments don't have it. So even though the Yemenite one does have it, and we always like to go with the Yemenites, but not on this one, when we have Geniza and the Sephardi manuscript, and the Benu Hananel also doesn't have it. So if you take the word kashya, then that's it. We leave it as a question. If you don't have the word kashya, then you can read the next statement as a response to this. So let's try to do that. We'll try to save Rav Papa. Rav Papa, hada amar bakarka tehorin lo shanu elamayim, aval dam lo. Okay, when I said that, or when the Rabbi Shimon said that water on the ground remains tahor, that only liquids on the ground are tahor. That's only talking about water, but not blood. Any amount of blood on the floor, if something touches it, tameh. Midoraita, right? That's the key. So there is a deoraita thing. So when he said here that this that bakarka tehorin, that was saying it was deoraita, it would have been asur midoraita, but in the Bet HaMikdash is tahor. So there you go. That's what it was. That's the proof for the papa. That's what he was referring to. Kelim, you're right. Kelim is always the Rabbanan to begin with, so that doesn't matter. And okay, and remains so. Okay, even water lamaran ela dehave revi'it techazel lehatbil bemehatin v'sinarot avala have revi'it temein. And even water only if it has a revi'it. Then because you can dip small needles and hooks in it. But if it's not, then even water that's less than that would be tameh in general outside the Bet HaMikdash. And so this is all this Baraita I was talking about outside the Bet HaMikdash. And so if it's karka tehorin, no, sorry, this is in the Bet HaMikdash. If it's karka tehorin, and that is the exception. And that's what Papa was talking about, that outside it can be different from inside. All right, last section. Now we're going to the Biuda, who is in the opposite extreme. Amar Mor. The Biuda Omer lakol tameh. Says liquids make impure all things, right? Food, utensils, everything. Wait a second. You're saying that he thinks even on the deoraita level that liquids can make a vessel tameh? But we have a Mishnah similar to a Mishnah. Actually, it's actually a deoraita, but regarding in Masechet, similar to Mishnah Masechet Kelim. This Mishnah is very interesting. It says, "Kol hakelim sheyesh lehem achorayim vatoch, kegon hakalim v'kesatot v'sakin v'hamar sufin, nitma tocho, nitma gabo." Nitma gabo, lo nitma tocho. Any vessel that is shaped that is such a way that it can contain something that has an outside and an inside, like pillow, cushions, blankets, sacks, leather sacks. If something on the inside became tameh, if a dead mouse fell inside it, then everything, the whole thing, inside and outside becomes tameh. But if a dead mouse touches only its outside, the inside is protected. Okay, that's such a shape that the point is to protect that which is inside. Okay, now Amar Biuda, that's out of Biuda. He qualifies this. He says what this only applies to liquids that touch it. But if it's a dead mouse, not so. Then dead mouse that touches anywhere, whether it touches outside, also inside. Touches inside, also outside becomes tameh. The whole thing becomes tameh. So you see, he makes a distinction between liquids and sheretz. Mali nitma mechamat mashkin, mali nitma mechamat sheretz. If the whole thing is if liquids make something tameh on a deoraita level, then they should be the same as a sheretz, which is also deoraita. And why would he make a distinction and say liquids don't go from outside to inside? That's the question. This question is so strong. You know what? It must be the Biuda changed his mind. He holds what he says in this baraita, and he changed his mind what he said above when he says that liquids are deoraita. No, they're not. That's answer number one. Answer number two, no, he never changed his mind. We're talking about actually different kinds of water. The case where the baraita here that the water doesn't go from outside to inside was only talking about water that's impure midirabanan, like if it touched hands. Hand impurity is only dirabanan. And the other case was talking about sheretz when he said it's deoraita, that the sheretz touched the water. Wait a second. If that's the difference that you're talking about in this baraita here, then you should have said that. You should have said this is only true if it's deoraita level impurity in the water, but not the Rabbanan level. This is a huge distinction. You can't just leave it assumed. So instead, must be that we're going to go back to the first answer, that in fact he changed his mind. And so we'll end there. That was the Biuda, who was asking about liquids being tameh deoraita, was challenged from kelim, and the answer is he must have changed his mind. So we see that the laws of liquids are complicated in and of themselves, but certainly when it comes to the Bet HaMikdash, they're exceptional. But the question is just how exceptional are they? And we saw a number of overlapping controversies in that regard, but hopefully we're able to put them all together and see which pathways work together. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.